Good morning, everyone. I think it's still morning. I'm going to say a couple of things before we jump into the material. First, I want to thank the organizers of ITEN Wired for putting on this event. I think it's obvious to everyone here the energy and the enthusiasm in the Pensacola area around cybersecurity and information technology is very noticeable. And secondly, we very much appreciate the opportunity to be involved. Northrop Grumman's an employer in the area, so we're very thankful for the opportunity to speak here today. Secondly, I'm going to leave some time for questions at the end. So I'll be talking for a little while, maybe introducing some new ideas, hopefully. So when you see something you're not sure about or you want to ask a question, go ahead and be prepared to ask those at the end. That way we don't have that awkward silence when I ask for questions. Force me to talk for another hour or two. So you see from the title here, I'm going to be talking about cyber resilience, and much like other terms in our business, like cybersecurity and cyber resilience, those terms have come to mean everything and nothing at the same time. They tend to be overused. They tend to encompass the protection of systems, but many other things. What I'm going to do is talk about cyber resilience from the perspective of controlling the cyber domain. And I'm going to start that conversation with a view of what it takes to control the physical domain. And then I'm going to relate that back to cyber. So I think most folks would agree that when we choose to, we can control the physical domain. And these pictures here create some images that help illustrate that. So in the air domain, you might get the image of the F-35, the most sophisticated fighter aircraft ever made. When we choose to deploy assets like that, we can control any airspace that we choose. When the sea domain comes up, you might get the picture of something like a nuclear submarine. Again, a very sophisticated platform. We're able to operate that platform anywhere around the world and take control of the sea domain anytime we choose. In the land domain, you might get the image of soldiers on the ground, laser targeting devices, calling in precision strikes from drones, taking control of various parts of the land domain when we choose. Space, it's the same thing. We have so many sophisticated satellites and ground stations that we can communicate and operate through space in much the same way we do the air, land, and sea domains. And so these platforms, they're very significant, they're very expensive, they're very technologically sophisticated, and they show a commitment to fighting and winning in those domains. But there's something common about the approach, and that is speed, stealth, and precision. What allows us to control those domains, and what these platforms represent, is the ability to move faster than the adversary. We can move in ways that are very hard to detect, or if they do detect something, that information isn't very useful for long. And we are able to deliver effects or achieve outcomes in very precise ways, whether that's a target or an information gathering operation. We can operate in those domains in very precise ways. And so those are common elements that enable us to control these physical domains. Now the question is, who controls the cyber domain at the moment? And I think all you need to do is look at a few statistics and open the headlines just about every week, and you can see that we don't control the cyber domain at the moment. And why is that? Well, let's look at some of the things that are in the different playbooks. Let's look at the adversary's playbook, and then let's look at our playbook and see what's going on here. In the adversary's playbook, they have certain tools. They have things like polymorphic malware. If you're not familiar with that, that's malware that is able to automatically generate itself. And when you see statistics that reflect hundreds of thousands of malware samples being generated every year, that's not people generating the malware, that's machine-driven malware. And what that does is it introduces the strategic element of speed into the adversary's playbook. They're able to move faster than we are. Another thing in the adversary's playbook are things like fast flux domains. So that's the idea where hot points and command and control nodes that are used to deliver malware or conduct reconnaissance are configured, used for mere minutes, and then those hot points and nodes disappear. That introduces the strategic element of stealth for the adversary, because even if you can perform some level of trace, that information isn't very useful because those nodes are no longer being used. Now, these elements of speed and stealth are not being sprayed out there like a shotgun. These are very targeted attacks, campaigns, well-resourced, well-organized. The Pentagon, OPM, take some of your commercial retail cases that you've seen in the news. They're very precise, very targeted. So in many ways, the adversary has taken a page out of our own playbook in the physical domain to take control of the cyber domain. And I think that's why they enjoy such success. Now let's look at some of the cornerstones in our playbook for a minute. We have things like the risk management framework. All right, the risk management framework is an excellent process to get some of the basics, and I'm not suggesting that we should not focus on risk management, but what I am suggesting is that as a cornerstone, as a foundation to controlling the domain, you can't rely on something like risk management alone, because it's not introducing the right elements. Other things that are in our playbook, concepts of operation that are based on keywords like detect and respond. All right, those keywords as a foundational element imply a reactive, kind of back on your heels posture. All right, and I'm not suggesting for a minute that we stop trying to detect and respond to things, but I am suggesting that as a fundamental concept of operations will not enable control of the domain. And then finally, a strategy based on accumulating people. Right? We're all for skills and workforce development, very, very much needed. But people against machines is not a winning combination. So I don't care if you have 6,000 people or 12,000 people, you're not going to overcome the level of automation that the adversary has through people. On top of that, we have systems, networks, ground stations, clouds, software applications that are generally static. They're configured once. There are policies in place to force them to stay configured that way. And then we use these tools and the techniques to try to keep out this highly automated adversary. So I think this picture is clear. Right? The advantage is clearly in favor of the adversary. They have things in their playbook that are far more sophisticated than ours. And so the question is, what do we do about it? So let me introduce something to get the conversation going. And maybe these next few slides are where you come up with some questions for me at the end. So one idea that we've been thinking about to move past risk management into something more proactive is what we call continuous trust restoration. And the idea behind that is to introduce these elements of speed and stealth and start to develop some other cornerstones to control the cyber domain. So in the as-is model, as I just explained, we're managing risk, we're detecting and responding, and that results in an adversary that can conduct reconnaissance, access your system, implant some malware, and exploit your system, and usually sit there doing that for as many as 250 days. So the automation and our inability to respond, gives them complete freedom of movement. Now, if we introduce this idea of continuous trust restoration, what we want to be doing is breaking that kill chain very proactively and in advance of them getting to the final stages of the kill chain. So you see up here in this little 4-circle diagram here, different types of keywords emerge. Configure, operate, dispose, restore. All right, I don't need to detect something to restore my system to a known state of trust. I don't have to wait. I don't have to sit in a static configuration while the adversary dwells for 250 days. So you see this concept of breaking the chain. So if he's conducting reconnaissance, he's mapping your system, there's no reason for that information to be useful to him for more than a day. If he happens to gain access or implant into your system, because there are a lot of inherent vulnerabilities in the computers and the operating systems, you should be able to kick that adversary out and restore your system to a trusted state before he's had a chance to get to the final state, deliver an effect, exploit your system, steal your information, whatever his goal may be. And so what this does is it creates some foundations that allow us to introduce those elements of speed and stealth. Now, you might be saying, well, that sounds great, but I don't think you can do that. It sounds too hard, and I don't know any way that that's possible. And the fact is, the ability to do this might be closer than you think, because there are many new tools of the trade that enable this type of concept of operation, this type of system to be built. So the tools of the past, not tools we're going to get rid of, but the tools of the trade that are most prevalent today are things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, antivirus tools, patch management systems, SIM tools. Those are fine. But again, those are not going to enable a proactive trust restoration model. And you look at this little blue box with the really tiny font in the middle of it that you probably can't read, those are new tools of the trade. All right, so when you look at industry today, the prevalence of software-defined infrastructure and the enabling tools inside of software-defined infrastructure create the opportunity to do something different. Within that, there are hardware roots of trust. There are tools that enable micro-segmentation of applications, of software, of people, of operating systems. Many of those tools automatically configure encryption, multiple layers of encryption into privacy zones controlled by identity. Network function virtualization, the ability to mutate the identity of a host, the ability to mutate the identity of a network, all of that is possible today through a lot of software-defined infrastructure principles. Now, those tools were created largely for efficiency and cost reduction within the IT infrastructure. But controlled and configured differently, they can also be used to implement stronger security practices. So you'll see these tools are layered into different types of systems in this picture here. From basic things that I think everyone would immediately understand, the cloud, right? Ground systems, command and control centers with complex software applications configured into them. Many of these tools are built specifically for that environment. The network, the communications, the interconnecting framework of the endpoints into that cloud, again, already enabled for automatic reconfiguration, software-defined command and control. And then the computing platforms out at what I'm just calling here diverse endpoints. You might be surprised to see me lump a mobile phone into the same box with an unmanned aircraft. But actually, they're not that different. Many of the computing systems that get put onto these platforms are very similar. And so some of the tools that are emerging into these endpoints can also be used on military weapon systems, on unmanned aircraft. And so what that allows us to do is take these highly configurable tools, put them onto really an end-to-end system for a government customer, or even pieces of systems if that's what's required. And you can use those to proactively reconfigure your system, operate it for some period of time, change its identity, change the IP addresses, restore it to that known trusted state. And that introduces some very interesting strategic elements on our side. All right, so speed comes from our ability to rapidly reconfigure our system. No longer will we be static. We don't need to sit and wait for the red light to go off on the SIM tool. All right, we can restore the system irrespective of whether we've detected an event or not. Because we can change the identity and obscure where applications are and what their identification is, that introduces the element of stealth. Again, I'm not suggesting that we'll eliminate the compromises in the system, but if you can confuse the adversary in the same way they're confusing us, you now have adopted some type of stealthy mechanism for security, a much stronger foundation than detect and respond. Right, so you could see this maybe being used across an entire enterprise, but you could also see it being used based on a tactical configuration for a mission, or perhaps a particular strategic mission, perhaps based on different groups of people. So those tools, enabling speed and stealth, configured and controlled, essentially change the paradigm of how we go about protecting our systems. And again, those things in the little blue box there, if you're not familiar with them, you soon will be, because they are available now. They are not being used yet to protect systems in this way, but they soon will be, and that'll change the entire approach. So, controlling the cyber domain. All of those physical domains that I talked about earlier, as much as many of you know, connect through a cyber infrastructure. One of the key requirements of the F-35 is its ability to link to other airborne platforms, kind of warfighting networks in the sky, connect back into the ground to receive targeting information, multi-domain operations between air, land, sea, and space, a common operational practice for our customers, enabled through a cyber infrastructure. For us to control 4 of the 5 domains and not control the 5th really puts us in a vulnerable state. So creating a future resilient cyber infrastructure is a mandatory thing for us to do. We have to be as committed to fighting and winning in that cyber domain as we are any other physical domain. So when you see a picture of something like an F-35, and people are still talking about patch management systems for the cyber infrastructure, we're not quite getting there yet. So we need to come up with something as sophisticated, as advanced, to allow us to control that domain. That'll allow us to fight and win on the digital battlefield. That'll allow us to fight and win on the kinetic battlefield as well. All right, well, hopefully I've given you some things to think about. Those were great questions, and I guess we'll wrap it up here. Thank you.